there's the question now, are there reasons to disbelieve it? Are there any positive arguments against it? There are also some arguments for, like the ontological argument, when we talk about the ontological argument.
Well, tell us what that argument is.
The ontological argument. This is a very nice argument. Anselm of Canterbury thought of it. I think it must be in the 15th century. He argued that the definition of God entails that God exists. Now, this would be a fantastic result, right, if that... Just the mere definition tells that God exists. So, what's the definition of God? The most perfect conceivable being, or let's say the most powerful conceivable being is an equally good way of putting it. And then Anselm argues as follows. Well, suppose this most powerful or most perfect being did not exist, right? Then he would lack the attribute of existence. But the attribute of existence is one of the perfections, or one of the things which makes a being powerful. But since he is by definition the most perfect being, he must have the attribute of existence. Therefore, God exists. Right, so let's go over the argument again. Yeah. Get the definition of God. How is God to be defined? Let's compare this with the unicorn. Well, how is a unicorn to be defined? A unicorn is a horse with a horn growing out of the middle of its head. There's nothing in that definition to imply that unicorns exist, and unicorns don't exist. But let's define God, right? An all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing being, right? These are some of his characteristics. And everybody will agree that's the definition of God. So now one of the definitions is he's the most perfect being. One of his attributes is utmost perfection, unimprovable perfection. Okay, that's the definition of God. Now Anselm argues, but if God didn't exist, wouldn't he be less perfect than a being just like him in all those attributes, except that that being existed? Because to exist is to be more perfect than not to exist. It's better to exist than not to exist. God is as good as you can be, as superior as you can be, so he must exist. So we know by definition that God exists. It's a brilliant argument, right? But it's wholly unconvincing to everybody who hears it. They think there's something going wrong with that, you know. That's a very strange argument.
All right, tell us what's wrong with it.
Well, the difficulty is nobody's ever managed to pinpoint exactly what's wrong with it. I'll tell you what I think is wrong with it, though the issue is not by no means clear. I think what's very funny in the bit that goes, science strikes you as sophistical, is the bit that says, God's the most perfect, existence is one of the perfections. It sounds superficially plausible, but what does it really mean, right? Is one of the perfections. I like to compare this to somebody who said, let's take the most tasty meal that conceivable. The most tasty meal conceivable. Does that mean anything to say that? This is the most tasty meal I've ever had, but it's not well defined, the most tasty meal conceivable, or, you know, the best football game conceivable. Not that I've ever seen. What does it mean? I mean, it's not a very clearly meaningful idea. So if we say we're defining God as the most perfect being, and we don't really lay down very clearly what we mean by perfect, then what does it really mean, the most perfect being?